All right, guys. Good afternoon, and welcome to Midday Due Diligence, part of Pick Six Sports. First things first, be sure to like and subscribe. We're always trying to grow the channel. We're trying to grow these shows. We bring you a Midday Cowboys show several times a week, including here on a Tuesday. And then, of course, Camber and Massey, they're going to have you covered on a Thursday. And, of course, there's always the Friday freestyle show. So you guys be sure that you liked and subscribe so that you catch all of our due diligence that we bring you here on Pick Six Sports. Really, really excited for today. We've got Dalton Miller. And of course, if you guys aren't following Dalton Miller on Twitter, you need to be doing so. You can see it's a pretty simple handle right there. Dalton B. Miller. Go hit him up. Great stuff. And first and foremost, man, just appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me. I don't get to talk just strictly Cowboys nearly as much as I would like to anymore. So it is definitely nice to come on and just get to bring my fandom out a little bit.
Absolutely. And that's a little bit of it. You know, I mean, we try to bring some takes, some thoughts that are outside the box. You know, if it's not always bright and sunny for the Cowboys, we're not going to make it bright and sunny. But fandom does come out indeed. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about this Rams game. We're going to talk about the Eagles game coming up, a huge one in for many reasons. So let's get to it. And first and foremost, before we do you have any work out there that you'd like to plug? Anything that you do that you would like to tell the people about?
Yeah, I mean, just go to Pro Football Network. That's where all my work is. We have some really, really good dudes there now. We have Arif Hassan, who we just kind of stole from The Athletic recently, which is an awesome get for us. Aaron Wilson is one of the most underrated insiders in the NFL, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't sleep at all. So we definitely have you guys covered when it comes to general NFL stuff. And whenever I get the opportunity to write about the Dallas Cowboys, I take that opportunity.
Absolutely. And we love that you do, because we love your content, because it's quality and it's good stuff, and it's stuff that you want to read about if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan. So go ahead and make that happen. All right. So Camber, let's jump into this. Okay. The Rams game, I don't know if this went as any of us saw it going. I think a lot of us kind of anticipated the Rams bringing a little bit more to the table than perhaps what they did. Does that speak to who they are as a team right now following their Super Bowl victory, or does it speak to the Dallas Cowboys, or maybe both?
I think it's got to be both. It's absolutely got to be both. As to the way that this offense is adjusted in its needs with Cooper Rush, because raise your hand if you thought we'd be 4-1. No one. So not only besides the way that they went and they looked at it, and we've got to take a look at that. Mike McCarthy said that he wanted to rush, get the ball 30 hands into the running back's hands, and guess what we did? We got the ball in their hands 30 times. But then on the other side, we talked about this last week that, that entire roster of the Rams, they've got a dude at each level, but nothing is gelling with that team. So it's got to be a combination of both for me.
Dalton, how did you feel about the game going in versus how it shaped up?
Yeah, so in my prediction, I actually thought that the Cowboys would win this game. My official score prediction was 21-20. And for me, it just kind of came down to, I had come off watching the 49ers and Rams the week before. I wrote about the 49ers defense and, the different looks that they gave the Rams, and talking a little bit about DeMeco Ryans as a defensive play caller. And I had written the week before about the Dallas Cowboys and how I believe Dan Quinn is the team's MVP right now. And I looked at both rosters and thought that the Cowboys defense could do a lot of the same things that the 49ers defense was able to do against the Rams. They actually played a lot more cover one against the Rams than the 49ers usually do. They're usually a little bit more zone heavy. The Cowboys like to run cover one when they can, and when they can get to the quarterback and bring 5, man up, and that's kind of what they did for a lot of the game. And they were just able to kind of, win their matchups. They mixed things up in coverage as well. But it really kind of came down to, in the end, their ability to consistently get pressure on Matthew Stafford. And it came down to the Rams' inability to run the football.
And for me, it also comes down to the Cowboys getting off to a hot start. I think it's really, really important that they get off to a hot start, because it looked to me like the Rams wanted to run the ball early. And once you're down 9-0, and I understand that, maybe you're not threatened by how many points Cooper Rush is going to put up, but you still got to fight your way back into the ball game. You still got to make sure that you get back into the ball game. And it seemed like, as a lot of teams do, they maybe abandon the run a little bit early in the game, and then Cam Akers gets thrown off. He's not really able to get his feet back under him. But it seemed like that quick start is really what forced them out of wanting to. And their offensive line is bad. I mean, that's another part of it, is you might have had some early success running the ball, but then it just kind of started going nowhere, and they resorted to throwing 40 times. And that's where the Dallas Cowboys want you. Mm-hmm. That's where any NFL team wants you to, they want to get a lead and then tee off with pass rushers. And that's how the Cowboys are built. And it's kind of the way this game unfolded.
I honestly am to the point that I want us to win the coin toss, not so that we have the ball first in the second half. It's so they see our defense first and sets the tempo for the game.
And it worked out perfectly in that way, because you stole that possession, and not in the sense of a takeaway, but in the sense of opening the game with that initial possession. And of course, that's always the reason to defer to the second half. But I mean, when you start 6-0, you've already covered, according to Vegas, suddenly you're up by half a point, so it's great that before your offense even steps foot on the field, you have a lead. And I think right out of the gate, if you're the Rams, that's a tough position to be in, and it's hard to keep your game plan going when in the blink of an eye, you're down 9-0.
Absolutely. And, the funny part about it was that play, it reminded me a lot of one of the plays where Eli Manning back in the day would have just fallen over immediately. And we all kind of laugh at it like, haha, Eli fell over instead of taking the sack or trying to make a play. But sometimes that's the best thing that you can do for your football team, is just take that sack and not risk the football. And as soon as that snap happened, you saw the left guard reached out left for some reason, and Osa came in to the inside and completely, there was nobody that touched him. You had Higbee trying to block DeMarcus Lawrence on the other side at the edge, and he was coming free as well. So Matthew Stafford is always going to try to make a play, or he's not just going to fall over like some of the older quarterbacks do. It's what he probably should have done there. But yeah, there was no chance of survival on that play, and I think that if he falls over there, the game might go completely different.
Why do teams do that? And not just the Rams trying to block DeMarcus Lawrence, but is it a matter of a defense manipulating matchups and getting what they want, or are teams offensively really willing to rely on tight ends to block legitimate DNs like DeMarcus Lawrence? It just, every time, whether it's the Cowboys having Schultz on a dude or whatever, I'm always just kind of scratching my head like, how does this end up happening so frequently?
Yeah, it's tough. Usually it happens because, you have 4 or 5 guys showing on the other side of the ball, not the other side of the ball, but, outside of that opposite B gap. So you have to have a one-on-one situation because you need to slide the protection left, and that'll leave you wide open with, a one-on-one on a tight end. Other times it's just kind of the way that the protection works. But yeah, it's interesting specifically with the Cowboys because they are able to move guys around so much. Obviously, they rush Micah Parsons from everywhere. But one thing that I wrote about in my thing about Dan Quinn was how good that defensive line works together, because they play a lot of games. They run a lot of stunts, and they run a lot of really complex stunts. And it's part of what has made Dorrance Armstrong so productive so far this year. Because if you put him in a one-on-one situation, like he was a couple of times against the Rams, especially against that bad offensive line, he was able to win. But a lot of times he's coming free off of a twist, and anybody can rush off of a twist if you're athletic. And Dorrance Armstrong, he may not look it because his aesthetic isn't great, but he was a very good athlete coming out of Kansas. And I was actually a really big fan of his coming out of Kansas. And it took a while for him to realize his potential, but I think he's finally starting to figure out who he is as a pass rusher.
So let's get to some star up for a guy on offense. Here's what we're going to do. We're picking a dude from the offensive side of the ball and from the defensive side of the ball to give a big star up to. So starting on the offensive side, Camber, who would you give the star up to?
Conor McGovern. I mean, that was a position I was worried about, especially I think Aaron Donald swinging over on that side, and he held his own. He had a fantastic game overall. I mean, if you look at that very first play of the game, Aaron Donald lined up against Zach Martin, and Zach Martin almost ended up in Cooper Rush's lap by the time he was, got that ball off. And Conor McGovern just had one hell of a game.
And what about the defensive side of the ball?
See, I keep going back and forth on this one, and I keep doing this. And
there's options.
There's
There's
a ton of, I mean, I want to give it to Dorrance. I want to give it to all these different guys, but more so, I didn't want to pick any certain one. I wanted to pick our run defense because it's been a weakness and everything. And, they didn't have many tries. I think they only ran the ball, 16 times, but we held them for 2.2, 2.3 yards each one. So it was anybody involved in that run defense for me.
Yeah. And, that kind of goes back to what I was saying is they started off running the ball and doing so, decently. But as the game kind of started getting into a 2-possession game, then you kind of hit your head against the wall and start getting some, 0 yards. You get a couple of there were back-to-back TFLs for 4 yards and 5 yards at one point. So that's an outstanding pick. I mean, by committee there with the run game. Offensively for me, I'm going to take the obvious guy. I'm going Tony Pollard. But I'm also of the mindset that this should be a player who's getting 15 touches a game in some way, shape, or form. I don't care how it's done. If you're talking about 12 carries and 3 catches, cool. Let's give him an inverted Deebo Samuel type of role. Everybody wants to kind of compare everything to Deebo. I would love more of like a Reggie Bush type of role for Tony Pollard, a guy who's getting lots of touches from every angle, every spot on the field possible. But we saw what he did when he's allowed to run between the tackles. And I was also, I couldn't help but notice that when Kellen went away from his tendencies of Zeke up the middle, Pollard around the outside, Zeke up the middle, Pollard off the tackle, those types of things, Zeke's biggest run came around the outside. Pollard's biggest run obviously came up the middle. And I think a lot of that has to do with just teams honing in on Kellen's tendencies and then Kellen going away from him. I do think it's as simple as that. So Tony Pollard, obviously great blocking up front, but there was a ton of individual effort. You saw all the broken tackles. You saw the effort from the tight ends and from Semi Fehoko getting downfield and blocking as well. That was a great group effort, but the individual effort from Tony Pollard is the reason why he's my star up offensive player. On the defensive side, I kind of want to go a little unconventional here because I thought Anthony Barr had his best game of the season. you could go. I don't go Dorrance because one of those plays came on special teams technically, so it's not a defensive play. But I thought Anthony Barr tackled well. There had been some times where he lapsed in tackling in the open field the last couple of weeks, but I thought he really picked his game up. And I would love to see that continue because his stature, his size and length can create real problems for offenses. And if you can add more to his repertoire, if he can really start coming along and being a productive player, that, the whole idea was he unlocks Micah Parsons. And so that's going to be big coming up against the Eagles as well. So those are my two. Dalton, who do you got?
Yeah, on offense, my player was stolen from me. That was a fantastic pick. It's tough because outside of really those two, there wasn't a ton of offense played in the game. So it is tough to really pick somebody. And I know that Tyler Smith didn't have his best game, obviously, but just to survive against Aaron Donald is it's a good thing, and he definitely did that. Now there was the sack, obviously, and he held on the sack, but I felt like he survived. And this is a guy who I didn't think wasn't going to be able to play offensive tackle as a rookie. I absolutely hated his tape at tackle when he was at Tulsa. I thought his hands were an absolute mess and he needed to fix his footwork. But the one thing that I did like about him, especially after he was drafted, was how he spoke about the position, how he talked about wanting to improve. And it wasn't just the normal, say the right type of thing. And I think that he has really worked on his craft so far. And it's to the point where I'm interested to see what happens if Tyron Smith is able to come back and be healthy this year, which I kind of doubt we'll ever see him again at this point. And that would be a shame just because of how phenomenal he has been at left tackle for the Cowboys over the past decade. But it just kind of goes to show, and as much as we hate it sometimes they're right with who they draft. And sometimes they're right with the decisions that they make. They made the right decision when they stuck with Dak, and I think they're going to end up staying with Smith at left tackle. So give him offense. And on the defensive side of the ball, I'm giving my star up to Osa. 7 pressures in the game. He was all in Matthew Stafford's lap the entire time. I feel like he's improved as a run defender. He's gotten a little more sand in his pants this year. And also, I want to give a half star up to Trayvon Diggs. Not necessarily for his coverage ability, because obviously he is part of the reason why Cooper Kupp went for the long touchdown. He was a little bit aggressive there. In that cover one, but I want to give a half star up for his physicality, because we talked quite a bit in the first week, after the first week, about him making a couple of business decisions, especially against the run. He is still never going to be a good run defender. It's just not in his nature to be that way. But when he wants to play physical, he can really do that. He can come forward, especially when it comes to tackling wide receivers, and show a little bit of physicality. He didn't wrap up and be physical against the run this week, but he went low. He did not shy away from contact, and want to give him a little half star on that as well.
I really wonder how much that final tackle he made against Cincinnati kind of boosted his confidence as far as being able to play physical. And I know you're talking about the run game, but when you make a play like that, changes what the outlook of that game ended up being, I really wonder if in his mind something just kind of clicked, because he has been a timid tackler, but I mean, this has been going for a couple of weeks now where he's looked a little bit more physical, but especially against the Rams. And I just really got to wonder if, maybe making that particular play just kind of puts a good feeling in you and you just, play faster, harder, more confident.
Could be. And it could be as simple as he looks at Twitter and TikTok and sees social media and it's like, you know what? Maybe I do have to start playing a little bit more physical. And maybe he got into the film session on Monday after the game against Tampa Bay. And Dan Quinn is like, listen, man, what are we doing here? And I don't think Dan Quinn is the guy to call a guy out in front of the entire room. He doesn't seem like that kind of coach. But maybe he just kind of made a little joke about him running away from that pulling guard. So I mean, sometimes that's all it takes.
And I'm not entirely surprised because it's not just him. You look at Izzy Mukwamu, who the whole reason he struggled getting on the field as a rookie wasn't necessarily because of his coverage ability. I mean, he had every measurement that Dan Quinn could possibly want in a defensive back, but he wasn't physical enough. And then now all of a sudden we're seeing in-game action, Mukwamu in his opportunities, line up in the box, on the edge, I mean, taking on these guys. And so it's really more of a team mentality, it looks like to me.
Oh, they absolutely fly to the football. And guys, I watch a lot of football, way too much football. That's part of the bad part about trying to cover all 32 teams. And nobody attacks the football. And I think part of it is Dan Quinn. I think the other part is Micah Parsons. The way that he plays the game, he is a freak. There's nobody in the NFL like him. But to play with the motor that he plays with, I think rubs off on the rest of that defense as well. It's the Cowboys and the 49ers. And it's no accident that those are the two best defenses in the NFL right now. They're both incredibly well coached, and they both play their absolute balls off.
You put the Bills up there?
I would if they had Tre'Davious White. When White comes back, maybe. If they would still have Hyde, they would be there. But losing Micah Hyde for the season was a big loss for them. They're still going to be a really, really good defense, and they're one of the teams that can rush with 4 and drop 7. They don't have to blitz, and that's a huge advantage of a defense. But I think that the Cowboys and the 49ers are doing more. They're more versatile with what they do defensively.
Sorry, I'm just laughing at our guy, Professor O here.
Gosh.
Anyway, appreciate that, Dalton. So we're going to keep talking about this defense actually for the Dallas Cowboys, and there's an old nickname for this squad that's starting to get thrown around here as we get ready to wrap up the first third of the season. Is it too early to label this team as a doomsday defense, or are they who we're seeing them be? I mean, Camber, what do you think about the early label of a doomsday defense for the Cowboys?
Well, if we're on the edge of what early's considered, I mean, we're on the very edge of it not being too early. And if we can go against this Philadelphia team that is the only undefeated team in the league this season and seems to be a whole unit out there, that if we beat them, then absolutely. I mean, and you know what? I can't even say that. I have to say, if we can hold them and we can hold them to less than 20 points like we've been holding every team so far this year, then they deserve that label. I mean, because if you look at this roster all the way down, when have we ever had this kind of depth in a safety room? It's been,
or at any of the positions.
well,
Never.
yeah. But the safety room though is like the redheaded stepchild, I think, of this defense and the way this team's always treated them. And Curse being out, I was scared. I was absolutely scared. and we've just got guys that we're able to plug in. I guess the only room that I guess I'm a tiny bit worried about, and it seems like it's starting to come along, is the cornerback room. But other than that, if I just keep looking all the way across at all the positions, between the depth and the way these guys have stepped up and they're performing, if we're not calling them yet, we will call them after a good performance next week.
So it hangs on the Eagles game.
Well, I think it solidifies it. Put it that way, because I got a little excited. I'm not gonna lie, I got a little excited after the game Sunday. I was like, screw it, I'm calling them the Doomsday.
There you go.
But then, some people were like, oh, you got to wait till they beat the best team in the league, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, we beat both teams that went to the Super Bowl. And, we held Tampa Bay, and nobody scored more than one touchdown so far yet this season. You got to start thinking that label's due.
Dalton, your thoughts on a doomsday defense for the Cowboys?
Yes. And coming into the season, I had, I think, higher expectations for this team than a lot of people did, just because I thought that this defense was going to be very good. And when you looked at this defense going into the year, you thought, like, damn, like when we're doing the 53-man cutdowns, like, who is going to get cut here? I mean, there's guys who are going to get cut on the defensive line and immediately go to another football team and probably make their 53 and get some play in the regular season. And that's just kind of the way that it was. I was not too worried about losing Jaron Kearse. You need to keep Micah Parsons on the field. Obviously, he's not healthy. He showed that this week when he was hopping around and on the bike and then going out there and finishing with 2 sacks. I mean, he is built different. But this entire defense is well coached. Like I said, they can run, a plethora of different coverages, and they can do them all well. The kind of coverage gaffes that we saw at the beginning of the season last year, where guys were being left wide open. And this is a defense that finished with the 3rd best EPA per play ranking last season. I thought that that's why this team was going to be okay this year. I questioned the offensive firepower, but we're out here with a backup quarterback and an offense that really can't do anything. And I don't think that that's been talked about enough during this 4-game run. The offense has not been good. They're not going out and scoring points. They are not going out and being very efficient. But this defense is that good. And I think the Eagles, just given what they have, is a unique challenge, because their quarterback is going to run the ball, 10 to 15 times, and he's damn good at it. It's one of those things where I think we've underrated Jalen Hurts' ability to pass because of how good of a runner he is. And he's been a fantastic runner since his days at Alabama. It's the best part of his game, or it was the best part of his game, to the point where if he would have ever had to switch to a full-time running back, he had that type of vision. And you don't see that even from guys like Lamar Jackson, who are more physically gifted. He's a smart runner. He doesn't take, huge, terrible hits very often. And he has continued to grow as a passer. And now he has, somebody like A.J. Brown to work with as well. It creates challenges for this team. On top of, Devontae Smith being a fantastic receiver, playing at 200 pounds when he's actually 165 pounds. I mean, he plays a lot stronger than he is. And then to have somebody like Dallas Goedert as well, and that offensive line, it's going to be a challenge for this defense. And it's just because offense, it has all the advantage in the NFL. The one thing that I can take as a little bit of solace is that offenses overall in the league right now are down, and I don't know what's going on. Teams are not scoring touchdowns. And I think part of it is the too high revolution. The issue with that is when you get a team with a running quarterback, it is very difficult to run too high stuff. But the Cowboys, with their defensive front, with the corners that they have, and with the good safety play, they create problems for offenses as well. So I am no more excited for any matchup so far this season than I am for the Cowboys defense and the Philadelphia offense.
So in a way, yeah, it could very well be the determining weekend on whether this is a doomsday defense or not. And not only that, but again, this Cowboys defense, you look at the defensive line in terms of the pass rushers that they have. And really that's what has made this whole thing go, is their ability to pressure the quarterback. Now you're going to go up against a team that has ran the ball 50 times in a single game at one point this year and have run the ball no less than 30 times in every game this year. So it does present a new sort of challenges for the Dallas Cowboys, especially when you look at, how they've been eliminated from contention at the end of the season. It's from teams getting physical and running the football. So this is going to be a really, really interesting game. I'm with you. I'm still holding out on a doomsday defense because I'm concerned. Camber brought up the corners. This going into the year, you were either going to be deep or thin. It was all going to depend on the development of Nahshon Wright, of Kelvin Joseph. And right now, I don't know if either of those guys would be ready to come in and take on a full workload for a full game should Anthony Brown or, heaven forbid, Trayvon Diggs have to miss a little bit of time. So that's really the one part that gives me a little hesitation is when you get into the meat of the season and you start losing guys and your depth really has to shine on, can you sustain this level of play? Now, going up against the Eagles, man, you talk about some interesting matchups and some question marks across the board. How healthy is the left side of that Eagles offensive line? I mean, everyone is questionable from the center to the left guard to the left tackle. Your backup left tackle is out. You have another depth center that's out. I mean, they could be in a precarious position with their offensive line. But to me, that could be a little bit of fool's gold because when things break down is when Dallas has trouble containing running quarterbacks. And that's, we saw Daniel Jones and what he was able to do. So that, even though they have some issues up and down that offensive line, it's still Jalen Hurts' ability to read and to run.
Yep. I agree 100%. And even with offensive line issues, the one mitigator of that is a mobile quarterback. And we saw that, like you said, with Daniel Jones. And Daniel Jones, for as athletic as he is nowhere near the runner that Jalen Hurts is. Yeah.
So before we get really into this Eagles game, one big topic this weekend has been that of roughing the passer. And it gets even more difficult when you're playing a running quarterback. The rules kind of start to gray. You get in tackle, outside of the tackle box, those types of scenarios, giving themselves up, the speed of the game. And the league, I don't know if this is a reaction to how the whole Tua situation was handled, but what exactly is roughing the passer at this point in time in the NFL?
That's a great question. And I think that the NFL is trying to figure that out. They actually met today to talk about this. They don't think that they are going to change any written rule in season. But we've seen the NFL do this before. They kind of look at things and change the way that they start to call things in season. I think that this was in reaction to his injury. I think especially when we look not as much at the one from Monday Night Football with Derek Carr, but with the Tom Brady one, I think that was a direct response to the 201 just because he was, if you really, really want to, put it under a microscopic lens. That's what I was trying to figure out. Microscope. if you want to put it under the microscope and really squint, you could see Grady Jarrett fling him around his body and onto the ground. But that's just the way that his momentum was going. It wasn't like what we saw with Trayvon Walker, where he took Davis Mills with the play not even going on and chucked him to the ground. It wasn't roughing. And the Chris Jones one was even worse because Chris Jones was making a play on the football. He grabbed the football. It was a fumble, and he made a play on the ball, and that's the entire reason why he ended up on top of Derek Carr. So they're going to have to figure it out. I was actually going to write about this today, and then I looked at the numbers, and I was like, man, they're calling roughing the passer way less. And I think they're calling roughing the passer way less so far this season because guys aren't really being overly aggressive with the quarterbacks anymore because they know if they breathe on a quarterback the wrong way, they're going to end up getting a roughing the passer call, and there's a possibility that they're going to get fined. And, you know, on top of that, you have our quarterback, Troy Aikman, talking about taking the dresses off, which you obviously in this day and age cannot do. But when we're talking about this, at its core, this is a gladiatorial sport. It is not for the faint of heart. And if you're going to take away the core principle of tackling, because that's what the Grady Jarrett thing was, that's what the Chris Jones thing was. It's a tackle. There is nothing excessive about what they are doing. They are just getting the quarterback to the ground. They're not picking him up and suplexing him. They are not choke slamming these quarterbacks. They are doing what they have to do to take them to the ground. And if you're going to make that a penalty, put the red jerseys on them, put a couple of flags on their hips, and just say, hey, you get a flag, you touch them with both hands, they're down. Because at some point, there's going to be a guy who grabs a quarterback and flings him around and stops and allows the quarterback to scramble away, make a big play down the field. And it's going to happen, and we've seen it happen before, but especially with the high-profile cases that we saw this weekend, there's going to be a guy that lets go of a quarterback before the play is over.
You know, and we even had a situation in our own game where Dante Fowler came in, and you saw he pulled up. He threw his hands back. He wasn't going in. He wasn't finishing that on him, and he got called.
Yeah. And I could see in the moment why they called that, because his helmet was close to the chin of the quarterback. But yeah, I mean, that's another one where it's just we're starting to get too far away from the game at this point.
And that concerns me when you're talking about a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, a guy who can bail, a guy, and not only that, but his size. I mean, he is a stout dude. You know, he is not Tom Brady at this point in his career. I don't know what his official weight is, but he looks smaller this year to me than he has in years past. That's not Jalen Hurts. Okay. This is a stout guy, and you got to hit him. Bring him to the ground. You got to hit him. And not only that, but his escape ability, his running ability, it just kind of, you look at these calls and it makes me just mentally have to prepare for something to possibly come up Sunday night where I'm don't erupt and blow the roof off my own home here. But is it different when it's a running quarterback? And does that more so help the defense because you have different rules once they're on the run? Or does the subjectiveness of it make it an even bigger mess?
I think it helps the defense a little bit even when they're in the pocket, because for some reason, I mean, we saw this with Cam Newton. When you are a big, physical, athletic quarterback, I think you get less calls. I think, guys that are big, Carson Wentz is another one. I think that Carson Wentz, for whatever we may think about his ability as a quarterback, he's a big, strong guy, and he's going to try to avoid sacks, and he can throw a defender off of him from time to time. And I think that those guys tend to get the benefit of the doubt less often. The one time where things can get a little bit tricky is when a quarterback is leaving the pocket, say they're rolling out right and they're kind of fading away, and they throw the ball, and as they're throwing the ball, somebody dives at them and hits them. Those are the ones that can get a little bit tricky because I think that those get called sometimes a little bit too often. And it's so difficult nowadays, too, because you can't hit a quarterback below the knee either. So you really are aiming at 100 miles an hour between the hips and, mid breastplate pretty much, because even if you go up, and you put your face mask into their chest, face masks are plastic and they can slide. And if it slides up and hits quarterback in the head, then that's 15 yards. So there's really not a ton you can do as a defender. And I think that it's a little bit easier when it's a running quarterback, but the one issue is when they do roll out and throw the ball and just get rid of it early.
Well, and we even had one, and I can't remember what game it was, but they called roughing the passer, and he had turned into a runner. He was 15 yards past the line of scrimmage. And it was like, wait, at some point in time, they have to quit being a quarterback if they've designated themselves to be running the ball. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, and then you get into giving yourself up and how close, you talk about going 100 miles an hour. A lot of times, tough. Yeah, when a quarterback when he takes off, a lot of times it's because he sees a lot of green, which means there's a lot of straight line for a defender to, there's not blockers in front. He just sees that maybe they're in man and everybody's downfield. I have an opportunity to pick up 6 or 7 yards. And those defenders turn around and peel back, and they're going full sprint, and they got to make that decision. Do I risk this guy giving me the old Kenny Pickett back at Pitt? Or, luckily we haven't seen that anymore. And thank goodness, because that would have just turned into a disarray of nonsense. But yeah, I really think that it's so hard to make those split decisions in the NFL. But a guy like Jalen Hurts gives you those issues, and that takes us into the Eagles game specifically. What is the best approach to containing Jalen Hurts?
It's tough. You can go the Miami Dolphins route of sending 5-6 guys almost every single play, and running a bunch of cover 1 and cover 0 behind and praying that you can get to the quarterback. You can run a bunch of zone coverage and drop 7 and hope that your front 4 can get there. You can have a little bit of a spy action. I would throw Donovan Wilson in there at spy, let him chase around Jalen Hurts. I would have Micah Parsons occasionally spy, but mostly rushing. And that's kind of how I would do it. I would still mix up coverages. I would be probably a little bit more aggressive than I normally am. But the biggest issue isn't, rushing the passer. It's staying and keeping your gap integrity and not trying to over rush. And I think what we saw with the Las Vegas Raiders when the Arizona Cardinals were making their comeback is that they stopped rushing because they didn't want to get out of position and allow Kyler Murray to sprint away. And so they just stopped rushing the passer and allowed Kyler Murray to just throw the ball all over the yard. You need to stick with your aggressiveness, but you need to do it in a responsible way defensively, and it's incredibly hard to do.
So when you talk about spying Jalen Hurts, I think a lot of times we kind of have this misguided notion of what spying is. Like you're just going to have that guy who runs around with him all over the place. And I mean, even though that's true to a degree, I thought it was interesting that, you're talking about Donovan Wilson and Micah Parsons occasionally. So does Micah Parsons' groin injury have anything to do with where your alignment for him is?
Yeah, a little bit. It would for me. I would actually keep him on the edge a little bit more, because when you're on the edge, when you're rushing the passer, you can be a little bit more proactive as an athlete. Playing linebacker is a little bit more reactive, and you still need to be reactive on the edge, but you're more reactive in a horizontal sense more than, you are going every which way. So I think keeping him on a side is a little bit easier, and that would take him away from spying as often. But there will be times where they will drop him back into coverage, and he won't necessarily be a spy most of the time, because he'll be in, a hooked curl zone type area. But he'll be able to come forward and make a tackle on, say, a 3rd and long if he's not rushing the passer on that particular play. So I think they'll use it sparingly. But I do think we'll see him a couple times shadowing Jalen Hurts.
Man, because I thought going into this thing that this would be a great off-ball type game for Micah Parsons. Obviously, if you have to, keep that groin situation in mind, then perhaps not. But considering they run and commit to it, I mean,
yeah.
That's the thing for me is the fact that they will commit to the run. And I don't know how much, even though Anthony Barr was my guy for this last game, there's been, ups and downs for him against the run for the Dallas Cowboys. And so it's tough. That groin kind of makes this a very interesting situation. And always in obvious passing downs, you want him rushing the passer. That should be a given by now, but man, I sure would have liked to have seen him more off the ball in this particular game to help out that run defense.
I agree. And I was talking about this a lot before the season started, and why I wanted him to still kind of be a hybrid player. And yes, without the groin injury, I think this would be a more off-ball game. But I do think that the groin injury, I mean, he's still a freak athlete, so maybe he can go out there with the groin injury and play off-ball and still be fantastic. But the other thing I will say is that moving him off the ball just improves your run defense all around, because if there is one weakness of Micah Parsons, it's that he's a 240-pound edge rusher. And sometimes he can get beat on the edge as a run defender. He, for as strong as he is, giving up 65 to 80 pounds is a lot, no matter who you are. So moving him off the ball and letting him play a little bit of linebacker is not a bad decision either. So it'll be interesting to see where he lines up this week for sure.
And it could be a matter of, hey, how's it feeling? By the time we get to Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, as that approaches, Britt Brown, they do a fantastic job in the way that they've handled players and their injuries across the board, really. So, Camber, that might be the case of,
yeah,
hey,
I would,
this is your call. How's it feeling? Come
right.
game time.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we basically saw that soft tissue management all week long, that he was with the rehab group, that he's going through the walkthrough, that we won't see Micah in practice. He'll be in there watching tape and everything like that, but they're going to just lay him low all week long.
Am I wrong for not being as concerned about A.J. Brown in this game? And it's because of the type of receiver he is. I can't recall a single big-bodied receiver that has given Trayvon Diggs issues. Going back to last year and coming into this year, I just obviously he's a great player. You got to respect him going into the game, and he's off to a phenomenal start. But is that a place where you can look at and go, okay, they've had success here, but we feel we actually have an advantage because of the type of success our guy has had versus this type of receiver? I'm more worried about Devontae Smith.
That's a great question. And it's one that I've kind of been thinking about because you're right. I think Trayvon Diggs has done a fantastic job against bigger receivers throughout his entire career. And it comes down to anatomy and physics. I mean, when you are 6'2", you are just going to struggle to go and mirror a 5'9" slot receiver. It's very difficult. And I do think somebody like Devontae Smith is a worse matchup for AJ Brown. So when you are running cover one, I would have Trayvon Diggs shadowing AJ Brown wherever he goes. But I think that we are underrating how good of a route runner AJ Brown is, even for his size. So I do think it's a better matchup, I think, and it's not one that I feel too terrible about overall. I do think that we are undervaluing AJ Brown's ability to separate. Although, like I said, with the physicality that Trayvon Diggs can play with his length, and with his athletic ability, I do think it is one of the matchups where it's not as bad. If that was Justin Jefferson on the other side of the ball, that's not a good matchup. That's just not a good matchup for Trayvon Diggs. But AJ Brown, like you said, a little bit bigger, doesn't move quite as fluidly. Yeah, it's not as bad, and I would rather just see Anthony Brown on Devontae Smith for the entire game if I have to.
Yeah, and of course they'll want to line those guys up in the slot. I mean, Jordan Lewis could have an interesting role in this game because of a guy like Devontae Smith. Because you are in the slot, and a guy like Jalen Hurts could kind of creep around in that pocket, and you're sort of a defensive back who sometimes can get caught in the middle of that sort of, your quarterback is he going or is he not? Do I come off my man? Do I stay on him? And so, Jordan Lewis lining up in the slot against Devontae Smith and then having to look at Jalen Hurts as a runner and determine, when do I break off my man to go help defend this guy? I don't know how much Deron Bland gets any run in this ball game, but those slot players, and then of course the big nickel safeties, all of them. I mean, for the first time, when I think about a team who can throw the football and has weapons in the passing game, I'm just not sure that there's really anyone in the NFC who worries me. And I guess if anyone was going to, the Eagles would be near the top of that. And I'm still just kind of like, I feel good about what we're going to bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the entire league, I mean, the Packers don't scare you. Tampa Bay should scare you, but I mean, we held them to 19 points. And that offense just hasn't really looked the way that we thought it would going into the season. Maybe things at home are affecting the guy under center. And obviously guys being injured, after the first game, because they were pretty healthy in that first game. You had a lot of their receivers get hurt. They're going to get back healthy. I think that offense will get better. I think that that's probably the team that scares me most from a passing perspective, just because Chris Godwin is so dang good and so underrated. And Mike Evans is, I tweeted it out the other day, the most perpetually underrated wide receiver in the NFL. And they have Julio Jones, who, when healthy, has looked good so far this year. He looked good in week 1. So I think they were the team that scares me the most. And then that's the team that scared me the most. And we still held them to 19 points. So you're right. I mean, there really isn't much that should scare them. I think the thing that scares me most is a mobile quarterback. And we're going to find out how that goes this week.
Give me a matchup in this game that you like, that you think Dallas can take advantage of.
Question. That's tough because, I mean, like Camber talked about earlier, like, this is a complete team, the Philadelphia Eagles are. And the Cowboys are darn near a complete team, at least on the defensive side of the ball. The offense, obviously, that we're lacking some weapons that we would like to have at least on the outside. But if there's a matchup that I like the most, I mean, it's got to be Micah Parsons against anybody. At this point, like I don't really know where else to go.
You can never lose.
You can never really lose when you're talking about Micah Parsons going up against anybody, and that's kind of the issue with this team. I think if there's a matchup I like the most, it might be if we run a lot of cover one. It would be Jayron Kearse against Dallas Goedert, and it's just because I really like Jayron Kearse playing man coverage against any tight end because he's 6'4", he's athletic, he's really, really good in those situations. I get a little worried at times when we're running more, exotic coverages, when we're running some more match stuff, because Jayron Kearse is part of the reason why there were so many open guys running around early last year. But I do think if we run a lot of man coverage in this game, a lot of country, spot drop type zone coverages, I really like that matchup of him up against Dallas Goedert.
Camber, do you have a matchup in this ball game that you think favors the Cowboys?
Well, if I knew it was Dak in there throwing, I kind of wanted to say James Bradbury and Michael Gallup.
It's a good one.
But not knowing that, I can't honestly say it, but that would be mine. And hopefully, maybe with Cooper Rush, can get that quick ball off, and I'd like to see that. But that would be mine.
You know, I'm curious as to how Philly's edge defenders do against the Cowboys. Because to be honest, I think Terrence Steele is a guy who's performed a lot better than many anticipated, and that includes people who were favorable towards Terrence Steele as well. I think he's been a lot better than maybe a lot of us thought. And even though they still have some pass rush ability, I'm interested to see how that defensive line holds up against the run, and if Dallas is willing to run at them. Obviously they've got some defensive tackles that are really tough against the run, so maybe it's not going to be your whole entire game plan, and that's going to make it tough when Cooper Rush is your quarterback. You're limited offensively in the passing game, but I think that perhaps running behind your tackles and pulling and getting Tyler Smith out in front and getting him in some space, trying to get him to that second level, that might be the direction you go. And of course, on the right side, Terrence Steele has been good, and you got Zach Martin over there as well. You can't go wrong. The job that these blocking tight ends have done, Ferguson, are we jumping the gun to say that Ferguson is the best blocking tight end on the team?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we're jumping the gun because, I mean, Schultz is kind of proven over the years he's not that guy that we thought he was going to be there. So, I mean, he's obviously been better as a receiver than we thought he was going to be too. So it evens out. But I think it's probably Ferguson already.
So that's the direction I'm going is I don't care which guy it is necessarily. We know how they're going to split the carries. But I think that you could have some success running at those edge players, you know, like Brandon Graham, 35 years old, and he's coming off missing 15 games a year ago. And they still get after the quarterback. They do that, but I don't know how much they would be able to hold up against a run game when you're targeting those guys. Fletcher Cox, Hargraves, and Jordan Davis are a load in the middle, but you Sweat. Yeah. I mean, Josh Sweat, granted, that's a more complete player, I would say. But that, to me, is going to have to be where you get your big pop from, is following those tackles and tight ends. So with that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with you, because when I've been watching the Philadelphia defense, when they get into, their 4-man, normal, over under fronts, And you can run on them a little bit, especially when guys like Milton Williams or Marlon Tuipulotu are on the field. When they have that second unit in, you can really attack them. And running in more obvious passing downs, which we are going to be annoyed at if it doesn't work. But we've seen this Philadelphia team early this year. When they are pinning their ears back, they get really overcommitted to rushing the passer, and they leave wide open rushing lanes. When they are in their 50 front and they have Jordan Davis in the middle, 2 defensive tackles covering up the guards, and 2 edge rushers, you better run it to the outside, because you're just not going to be able to run it in between the tackles. It's not going to happen. Jordan Davis is a house. So don't even really try to do it at that point. And like you said earlier, buck trends. Run outside the tackle with Zeke. Run inside the tackle with Tony Pollard. Playing defense and calling defenses, it's about playing to trends, offensive trends. And playing offense is about going against defensive trends. And it's what makes guys like Andy Reid such great play callers. And it's what makes guys like Zach Taylor, makes you scratch their head why they haven't fired themselves and actually hired a real offensive coordinator. So, yeah, I mean, I just think that not running into a brick wall is always a good idea. And when they get into that 50 front, just don't even try it.
Yeah, and where did the Lions have their success running? I mean, they went crazy in the first half.
I mean, it was running between the tackles whenever the Philadelphia Eagles were in that 4-man front. They were just out of control in that first game. And the run defense has started to play better. They have not been as out of control. But if you could throw the ball on them a little bit, if they are having trouble getting to the passer, then maybe they go a little bit more out. They pin their ears back, and they get a little bit of out of sorts in those 4-man fronts. And that's what you got to kind of hope for.
All right, let's close this thing up. Score and bold predictions. Camber, let her rip.
Dalton kind of just stepped on, pointed out a whole lot of what my prediction is based on. And it's based on this run game, because I'm basing on it that we don't have Dak back, and that we are going in there with Cooper Rush, and that it's going to have to depend on the run game. The other thing that's really in the benefit of our team is that Zeke goes off in Philly for some reason. So I'm looking for that out of Zeke. So I've got us with 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 field goals. Do the math. We're at 20. I've got them at 19. So
20-19.
Yeah, 2019 Cowboys. I think the defense, I think, as long as they do exactly and they keep Jalen Hurts from becoming that mobile quarterback that we saw them let Daniel Jones become, I think that we can contain them in the other areas. So yeah, I've got it a close game. We all are going to need our Rolaids and something to drink, because our nerves are going to be on edge. It's going to come down to it. But 2019. So
I think you get another defensive score. I think that, last year we saw Trayvon Diggs take one to the house. I'd like to see it be another guy. I mean, I don't care who it is, of course, but I think that you're possibly going to see someone like an Anthony Barr or LVE, one of those guys who's a little bit more underneath linebackers. I would like to see one of them get a short field turnover and turn it into points. And that's going to be my prediction.
that was my bold, that LVE would get the interception this week, but no points. I didn't have him running it back. So
I'm just trying to figure out how to get into the end zone. Offense, defense, I don't care.
Who cares? Get the ball there.
We're just trying to put, they gave him a short field after the blocked punt, and they moved this far and had to kick a field goal. So I'm just trying to find ways. I think a lot of people might go to they're ready for Kevontae Turpin to return something, to really pop one, even though he's done a fantastic job. They're waiting on him to get to the end zone. But I think a defensive player comes up with a score, and I think that your ball game is going to go 24-21. The Cowboys win.
I'm looking something up real quick. I'm trying to see. Okay. Let's look at this here real quick. Punt team DVOA. I want to
Yeah, I
see
was
how
wondering about
good.
that.
I want to see how good Philadelphia is. Because their overall DVOA on special teams is like 26th, so it is not very good. And I'm trying to find where they are here.
I like where this is going.
I don't think it's very good. So
Uh-huh.
it could be the Turpin week. I think to win this football game, they need to get a special teams or defensive score. I don't think that the Cowboys are going to be able to score. I mean, they would need, I think, multiple short fields to score 2 touchdowns. This is a defense that has proven for the past 2 years that they can get turnovers, and we have seen with Turpin that he is special when it comes to returning punts and kicks. I think that it is going to be a close game, but I have never done well predicting Cowboys wins in these situations unless I feel like really good about the matchup. I don't feel great about this matchup. I think Philadelphia is a fantastic team. If we had Dak Prescott healthy, I would pick the Dallas Cowboys to win. But we do not. I think this is finally when Cooper Rush has his first loss as a starter. I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm going to go 24-20 Philadelphia wins.
Not unfair.
Nope, not at all. Not at all.
It's
Not
the reverse
unfair at all.
curse.
Hey, and
Reverse
that's the
jinx.
thing. You either get to be right
Or
readily
happy.
wrong.
Yes, exactly.
Just like happy to be. I'm elated. I'm glad that, yeah, I'm with you. All right, guys. Man, Dalton, thank you so very much for popping on with us and spending time with Pick Six Sports and our midday show. It's greatly appreciated. I know your time is valuable. So enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you so very much, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
You guys like, subscribe. We do shows every Tuesday at midday. Camber and Massey, they'll have a show on Thursday, of course, and then it's Freestyle Friday. So, Pick Six Sports, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Have a wonderful day.